All right, guys, good morning. I finally made it here. I had every technology challenge you could have this morning, but I am here. It is Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021. This morning, we're going to talk about how to respond to a crisis. Got 5 areas of crisis and how you process a crisis, and then how do you respond to it? Let's get started.
It is ultimately important for you to look at your goals, truly what you want to do in your life, and then look at the people who you spend the most time with in your life and figure out if that lines up.
All right, guys, what's happening? Good morning to you. Man, I got to tell you, it's been an interesting morning. I got visitors in from out of town. I got all kinds of stuff going on, and nothing went smooth this morning when it came to getting to the office here. My computer wasn't working right. My camera wasn't working right. The microphone disconnected from the computer. You know how it goes, but we're here. I'm happy to be here with you guys. And this morning I wanted to talk to you guys about, kind of responding to a crisis. I think we all go through, crisis, loss, different things in our lives. And last year's a great example of that, right? And so some of this, what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is kind of the 5 stages of how you respond to a crisis. And this, I actually got this from Grant Cardone. Like during COVID, Grant Cardone did a training and kind of talked through the different phases that people go through when it comes to dealing with a crisis and how people just process that in general, right? And there's a lot of things that we go through in life, whether it be personal or business related, that lead us to being able to, needing to understand, these stages of crisis. And essentially, the last step of this, we're going to go through 5 stages, I guess, is a better way to describe it. But the last step is acceptance. And that gets you to the point where you're actually taking action on moving forward. And so obviously the goal is to get through those first 4 stages as fast as possible, right? To be able to process the whole picture as quickly as possible so that we can get back to living our lives in the best way possible. And it is so important, guys. Like, the things that we deal with, I say this all the time, like when I study people who are incredibly successful, it's not that they don't go through crisis or they don't deal with challenges, but it is the speed at which they're able to process the stages of the crisis and get back to taking action. And so I wanted to share that with you guys this morning. And again, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, I got from Grant Cardone. I put my own thoughts into it. But man, what a great structure of the stages of crisis Grant provided in the middle of dealing with, the very start of COVID. So I want to say good morning to some folks here. As always, we got a bunch of people on here this morning, so bear with me. Brian Sharp, good morning to you. Christina, Dean, my wife is on here. Good morning, babe. Love you. Dayton, good morning, my brother. Dawn, Carla, good morning to you. Spencer Boyd, my man, the number 20 in the NASCAR Truck Series. Check him out. If you guys aren't following Spencer Boyd, man, what a cool dude he is. And check him out. Definitely check him out. He's driving the Raised on Blacktop number 20 truck. So check him out. Tammy Clark, good morning. John Rugg, good morning to you. Jared Bird, Dave, good morning. Chris Filippelli, Rick, David, Quincy, and Preston, good morning to my little buddies. I hope you guys are watching. Daddy loves you. Kim, Christina, Lynn, Ryan, Chris, Cam Roberts, good morning to you, man. All right, so let's dig in here, guys. So what are the stages of crisis that we deal with? So the first thing that generally happens to us when a crisis happens is that we go into that stage of denial, right? Like that stage of just kind of shock. You're kind of stuck in that one place of like, why is this happening to me? Maybe this is going to change. What's going to happen? You're still just kind of in that place of shock. You're kind of gathering information and trying to figure out exactly what's happening, right? And so the sooner that you can get out of that stage, the better. Typically, the next stage that you go into is one of anger, blame. You're trying to figure out why this is happening. You might have some hate in your heart at some point, right? When bad things happen. I've been through some things just in the last 12 months, man, that like really challenged me to dig deep, both in my faith and in my values, to be able to harness that stage, right? That anger stage, that kind of, I hate this. I don't like this, what's happening to me. So you go from denial to anger. And then the next step is that you start bargaining with yourself, right? You start playing those mental games of like, how is this going to happen? Like, how is this going to play out? You start thinking about how bad it could possibly be. You start essentially negotiating with the end result. You start thinking through all of the things that could potentially happen. And this is for me, the first two generally for me are pretty quick, right? Like I get through that stage of like, oh man, what's happening here? And then to, man, I don't really like this very much, or the anger stage. And then when I get to step 3, this is where you really have the ability to accelerate through some of the crisis that you're dealing with, right? Whatever that crisis may be, you have the ability to really accelerate through it by switching your mental position, by thinking that these things happen for us, not to us. What is this supposed to be teaching me, right? But if you spend a lot of time in stage 3, in that mental kind of head game space, where you're wondering what's going to happen or thinking about the worst case scenario, this is kind of the worst place that you can be, right? It really, the more time you spend in that space, the worse the next stage is going to be. And we'll get to that in a second. But I want you guys to think about that. When something happens, you go from, that denial stage to the, man, I don't like this, to you start negotiating what's going to happen with yourself, playing the head games with yourself. How much time do you spend in those 3 stages? So if something happens to you today that's really bad, how much time is it going to take for you to process those 3 stages, right? Because those 3 stages, and actually the 4th one you can lump into there. It's kind of like the depression, grief stage. Like, man, why this is happening? Why is this happening to me? Like, some people go through things where literally they get into a depression where they can't get out of bed. They can't, live their life normally. And I just want to tell you guys, like, I've been in that place in my life years ago, probably, 10 to 15 years ago. Well, probably actually 15 years ago is more fair, because, 10 years ago, I had it somewhat figured out how to deal with these types of things. But 15 years ago, man, I would get in these dark places like many of you probably have experienced or maybe are still experiencing. And I would just think, like, why me, man? Why is this happening to me? And so I would get in this place where I just didn't want to deal with anything. Like, I would go to work, I would go through the motions, I would do, everything I was supposed to do in life. But like, man, I just didn't feel very good about the things that happened to me. And so I would spend a lot of time in these states of, grief, depression, whatever you want to call it. But I would spend a lot of time in that place of like, from the denial stage to the anger stage to the, thinking about how bad it was going to be. And then into this stage of, man, this is just terrible. Right. And I would think for so long about how bad something was that I never was able to get to stage 5, which is acceptance, right? Where you start to take action. You start to develop your path forward. You start to think about, how am I actually going to correct the course here? And ultimately, I want you guys to think about this. Like, from the time that something bad happens to you to the time that you start taking action and getting back to your normal life, or taking action to address whatever that is, how long does that take for you? And how can you condense that in your life? Like, how can you get through these things? And I was just, Chris Saunders from Raleigh, North Carolina, great friend of mine, is in town. And we were talking about this on the way over today. You know, how do you get to that place, man, where when things happen, you just kind of flip a switch and you get back to normal? How do you get to that place of your life kind of being a routine that doesn't get knocked off course that often? And so, you know, for me, I've been, you know, in this kind of self-development journey, reading, kind of studying people, trying to figure out the secrets, the little gems that other people have, their routines, their habits, just kind of what they do. And I've studied so many of those people, and I've put so many of those things into action in my life that the stages of crisis for me and how I respond to those situations, the amount of time it takes me has condensed so much that these things have become speed bumps instead of roadblocks. And so that is why I wanted to talk about this. Is I know that, you know, 2020 presented a lot of challenges to people. It presented a lot of personal challenges, a lot of business challenges, probably even a lot of spiritual challenges, right? Where people start to wonder, like, why is this happening? And so when you spend too much time in those first 4 steps, the denial, the anger, the negotiating what's going to happen with yourself, and then that stage of like kind of depression or grief, man, it really stops everything in your life, doesn't it? It stops any momentum that you've had to that point. And that one little word, worry, is what stops it all. And so I want you guys to think about this. The reason that I believe that I'm able to process this stuff now is partially because of how I've designed the environment that I exist in. And I say that I was talking about this with Chris on the way over. Like, one of the things that I have in my life is like just a massive amount of routine. So like, you know, I said to him, like, one of the kind of alternative benefits to doing Morning Perspective is that I have to be here at 7:30. I have to be in front of a computer, either in my office or at my house in front of my computer in my office. But I owe it to you guys to be in front of this computer. And so that's created a massive amount of structure in my life. That a bunch of other things, you know, you guys all that listen regularly know that I'm a big person on morning routine. I'm a big person on scheduling everything. We talked about that yesterday, how to plan for a successful week. If you guys didn't catch that, go back and check it out. But that structure and that discipline that I've implemented into my life over the last handful of years, and I continue trying to raise the expectations of that discipline in my life, that has helped me be able to process these things. And here's the second part of that, is that through that discipline, I've been able to grow the goals that I have and grow the impact that I want to make, that I have this burning desire to deliver to the world. That impact and those major goals that I have, they require me to not spend a lot of time in those first 4 stages, but to spend as much of my time as possible in stage 5, which is taking action, right? Accepting that these things are going to happen. You know, one of the things that I had to process in 2020 was, man, the bigger your goals are, the more crisis you're going to face, the more bad things are going to happen. Why? Well, it's part of the process. It's just how it works, guys. And so it's not you that anything is happening to. It is just life. Life happens, right? But man, there are so many gifts that happen from those times of crisis in your life. The people that come to help you, those relationships that are maybe at a distance, that when you go through crisis, they get a little bit closer, right? Those relationships develop a little bit deeper. The lessons that you learn from crisis that you're able to share with other people to help them avoid crisis, those are some of the greatest gifts that life has to offer, right? And so what we learn from that, what we learn from those gifts is to appreciate adversity, to lean into these times of crisis, and to process those first 4 stages of crisis as fast as possible. So getting through the denial, just getting to acceptance as fast as possible, right? Processing whatever negative feelings, whether it's anger or disappointment or, whatever negative emotions, these things that happen that we start blaming others. That's another great thing to mention here is, when things happen, just take full responsibility, right? Don't spend any of your time blaming any other parties that are involved. Just take responsibility for your part, right? And the more that because that drives, again, our goal is to get to acceptance and taking action as fast as possible. So not blaming gets us to acceptance and taking action faster, doesn't it? When you find yourself in that space of trying to figure out, man, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? The worst thing that's going to happen never happens. So don't spend any time thinking about that, because you can't predict the future and you have no idea what's going to happen in the days to come that's going to completely change the path of that crisis that you're in the middle of. And when you get to that place where you're feeling down, you start to, and I went through this for a handful of days in 2020, right? Where I wasn't feeling myself. There were things that were happening to me that I wasn't familiar with how to process. But what I did was I was able to process those things faster than in the past. I was able to learn and recognize the patterns of thought in myself that, boom, get me back to taking action, being myself, my normal routine a lot faster than it would in the past. And so I want you guys to think about that. When you get into these situations, I want you to start measuring yourself on exactly how long it takes for you to get back to being yourself, for you to get back to serving other people, whatever responsibilities you have. Remember, if you're a parent, you're a business owner, you're a leader in your church, you're a person that people depends on. You owe it to those people and to yourself to process these times of crisis as quickly as possible. And so I want you guys to really, really think the next time something, and maybe there's something happening for some of you right now that you need to deal with. And if there is, I'd be happy to talk through any of this if you want, right? I can help you be able to process these times of crisis. Because what happens in these times of crisis a lot of times is that we actually lose ourselves, right? We lose the true version of ourselves to this crisis. And what happens then is that you're stealing from every single person around you. You're stealing those days, and maybe those days are those days that those people actually needed you the most. So we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to those people that we care about to be able to process these things as fast as possible. And if you're a leader, man, staying calm in a time of crisis is the most important thing that you can do. Last year when COVID happened, I've told this story a few times. I just told it to Chris Saunders on the way home from the airport last night. When COVID hit, I was just as scared as everybody else, right? I didn't know what to do. I've got a lot of things around me that I have to make decisions on, a lot of people and families that depend on those decisions, right? If I make the wrong one, what happens? And so when COVID hit, I remembered a book that I was reading that had this quote in it. And so I shared this quote with our team. It said, in life, man, there's 2 types of soldiers. There's soldiers that shoot well at the range, and there's soldiers that shoot well while they're being shot at. And we're going to have to learn this year to be the latter, because we're going to take on a lot of fire. And when you are able to be that soldier in life that shoots well while being shot at, there's nothing in this world that can stop you from achieving anything you want. And so when I look back at 2020, man, the gifts that we received as a company, the relationships that were formed, the appreciation for each other that we created during that time of crisis, man, it's one of the greatest gifts I've ever had in my life. And that goes all the way around, man. I was shown so many things during that period of crisis in 2020. So many people that made their places, made their way into different places in my life. You know, some people stepped up and some people retreated. And so remember that. There are so many gifts. It is such a gift to be able to live the lives that we live and to be able to think through these things. These times of crisis are some of the greatest gifts you could ever receive if you're able to process it properly. If you don't find yourself processing these things properly, I would audit the people around you and see how they process crisis. Because many times we are a reflection of what we see. And so if we see people that are constantly overreacting to problems, it's very difficult to stay calm ourselves because we start to subconsciously mimic those actions of the people around us. So you have to be very careful about what you see, what you take in, the information that you consume. Is it positive or is it negative? If you audit those 5 people around you and you figure out what their default emotions are, how they deal with crisis, you are likely to drift in that direction. Whatever those 5 people do, you are likely to do as well. And so that's why they say you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. It's true. So think about that. How do those people, if you're having a challenge processing crisis, how do they process it? That is likely to be exactly the way that you process it. One of those 5 people you will find yourself probably behaving a lot like. So that's a way to audit it. If you find yourself in that situation where those 5 people, you write down those 5 people and you write down the characteristics next to them that come to mind when you think about them. If those aren't positive, then you need to figure something out, right? You either need to have that conversation with those people or you need to distance yourself from them. If you've already had that conversation, it hasn't been helpful, because those things, all of that, will help you when it comes to responding to crisis. If you are constantly dealing with other people's crisis, then you won't have any time for yourself. And so think about that. Think about how long it takes you to get from the beginning of a crisis to the part that you're taking action. You're developing a strategy of how to deal with that crisis and how to get back to your normal everyday life. And think about the impact that makes if you do that effectively, because you're setting a great example for other people, right, to be able to deal with crisis effectively as well. So that's it for this morning, guys. I hope this conversation sparked some thoughts for you. I hope it gave you a different perspective on the whole idea of crisis. Crisis is a gift if we choose to look at it that way. And, it's difficult to get to that point when you're working towards that. But man, is it a gift once you get there. And, when you get to that point where you start to look for the opportunity in every challenge, and you start to realize that, during times of crisis or adversity, that most people retreat. And so those are times when you have the ability to separate yourself, separate those people around you and your company. If you're talking from a business standpoint, you can create distance between you and the competition anytime there's a crisis. Crisis is a time of opportunity if you choose to look at it that way. And so I want you guys to leave this morning thinking about life that way. How do you get from crisis to taking action to acceptance and just going back to normal life, figuring out how to deal with it? How do you process those stages a little bit faster to get you to that point of getting back to life? And then how do you take and extract the gifts that come? It's all about perspective, guys. It's all how you look at it. Look around you, figure out what's going on, how relationships are shifting, what people are coming to help you and which people aren't, which people run to the problem and which ones retreat. There's a gift in every challenge, folks. I hope you guys can see that a little bit better after this morning. Appreciate you guys being here. I will see you again tomorrow morning, same place, same time, right here on Morning Perspective.